May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord. Amen.
Amen.
So you have another new face up here. You've been going, somebody I met early said, I think it was Anne, she said, I said something about change is inevitable, or something about change because we were talking about that, and she said, well, we're learning that. So we've had a lot of changes. I was thinking that I would want to know who this person standing up here is. So I hope you do too, just to so you won't wonder. A few things. My name is Daphne Hawkes. I'm a retired priest in this diocese. In 1977, Bishop Van Duzer ordained me as the first woman priest in this diocese. So that's my one claim to fame forever. And I've known Peggy a long time, and I knew your other rector, Bruce French, too. I retired in 2001, 10 years ago, and have been enjoying supply work, some, not always. I don't mean not always enjoying it. I mean, that's not what I've been doing all the time. But I have 4 children and 7 grandchildren who are pretty much around. They're all now back on the East Coast. They were all over in Germany, one family, and the other was in, 2 of the others were in California. So now they're all around. So I'm absolutely luxuriating in what being a grandparent is. And I had no idea about that. And some of you are smiling because, as you know, the gift of it is you can just love them. And you aren't responsible for when they get tired or when they get cranky. And you don't take on the guilt of the whole thing that somehow comes with parenting, doesn't it? And so it's just so wonderful. I've got a bunch around here, some even in Mendham, which is near to you, and having fun with them all. Okay, now, that's probably enough to tell you about myself. I'll be here till the end of April, which I'm really looking forward to. And as my grandchildren, who I saw last night, some of them, the older teenagers, one would say, and TMI. If you don't know that, that's too much information. From early years, I've always liked the Lenten season. And I do remember some of the things like putting the money in the little, I don't know if they do that anymore, little boxes, Lenten boxes. I remember, I was born in Europe, my parents were there until 41, so my father stayed, but we just got out, my brother and I and my mother. And so we were in Washington during the Second World War, and I do remember sending bundles for Britain and stockings. I think my mother sent stockings to her cousins way into the 60s or so. And finally they said, we can buy stockings. The nylons, you remember some of it? And the rationing and everything. So, but I liked the part about the giving, the saving. I don't think, gave up anything and kept it. Did any of you do? Through the whole 40 days. And that always seemed strange to me that we had to do that. But I'm going to start and end something in this little talk because it seems crucial to me that it's important. To me, it's a very important thing about Lent and Easter, or Lent and Good Friday, until the time, the prelude or the beginning of getting ready for the celebration of Easter. And it's, some of you probably know, there was a Trappist monk who was a writer, a poet, and a ecumenical, or even more than that, an interfaith pioneer in many ways, named Thomas Merton. And he wrote something. He was born in 1915, he died in 1968. But he wrote something, he was very involved in social justice, spirituality, and pacifism. He was a Quaker at heart, probably, even though he was a Roman Catholic. He wrote 70 books. And this is one of my favorite quotations from him. And it'll tell you why I said a service of joy. Even though it's Lent, which we always thought of as penitence. If you do not know the difference between joy and happiness, you have not understood the Christian journey. Happiness is based on outside circumstances, but joy is able to be present in the midst of suffering and sadness. For some of us, being surprised by joy in the midst of really hard things was what brought us to become to followers of Jesus. When I was 14, my father died, and that was a very sad time. And I remember thinking, my questioning always of the church was, how it seemed to me they were out of touch with the realities of my life. And I remember Good Friday, the whole idea of a day being called good, which was a day on which a man of 33 was crucified, was in great pain, and died. And then I learned how the crux of the Christian faith is paradox. And how the things that the world sees, and we heard that in St. Paul's letter to the church at Corinth, the things that the world sees as failures are not failures in the eyes of the church, in the eyes of the faithful, because they're just human. I mean, we all will die. Hopefully not ever in the circumstances of somebody like Jesus, who was hanged, as you know, between two thieves. So he was terribly wounded by the lack of support, by the lack of understanding. And so Good Friday as a term, good, was something that always bothered me. I remember also humility, which we grow up feeling, especially in today's culture, that humility really means that you're humble, but you're humiliated. It's not the same thing at all. And that's something, during these weeks, I'd like to talk about the things that I found. I was the chaplain at a boarding school in Massachusetts for 3 years. And the things that I found there that the young people, my oldest grandchild is 14 and the youngest is 3. So I'm not up to that point in terms of asking them questions. Well, I do hear from the teenagers. But I think that all the words that we assume we understand, the subtleties between them, like joy and happiness, are very important to understand if we want to keep deepening, especially as we get older. There's a Thomas Merton. The other thing I loved about it, or that attracted me, was his, as I said, his involvement with the East. I've studied with a Lama, a Buddhist Lama, and the Dalai Lama. Actually talked to him a number of times. He's right up here in Washington, New Jersey, at least once every 2 years, at the Tibetan Buddhist Learning Center. Excuse me. And Thomas Merton said, well, he died in Bangkok. He was visiting with Tibetan monks talking about prayer and meditation. He was very intrigued by their understanding of that and their preservation and teaching of this, what they call skillful means. We have not always taught that. We assume, we talk about prayer, but we don't teach people often what it means to pray, or how we're listening to the inside of ourselves, really, and assuming the God within, Christ within. So that was That was one thing that I found about him that was so interesting. So as a child, I remember starting to read about some of the Buddhist, the Hindu religion. And I think that we are at a point in terms of the world where we really need that dialogue more and more and more. And I won't talk about how little we know, but we're all learning about Islam. Anyhow, how do we call Good Friday? Why did we call it Good Friday? The other paradox for me is I came to see that much of what Christianity described was certainly either paradoxical or foolish. It was so counter to the world that I was learning about as a teenager. And even if one only had a beginning sense of what the values of the world were, which is probably what I felt as a teenager, I think probably because my father had died and because I'd been born in wartime France, I was probably sort of a nerd or a gurn or whatever what they call them now, in terms of thinking about stuff a lot. And in the midst of lots of things, I had lots of divorces in my family, in the midst of those, I would be surprised by the presence of joy. If you've ever felt that, you know what I'm talking about. And that is something that is hard to explain if you haven't experienced it, but it's very paradoxical. It's very surprising. One of the other things that the monks said about that is one of the men was asked, a monk was asked, why does he, and Thomas Merton was asked, why should we learn to meditate? When we're young, why should we learn to meditate? And he said, so you can enjoy old age. And I think it really is true, because we get slowed down. I'm 73. You get slowed down, your body begins to slow down, you even get a little, you're not as excited by all the excitement, all the things, the drama of life. And so you need to have something inside that allows you to be still, to be quiet, without feeling like you've been shunted out of the world. Because our world really, really values doing or having, not just being. And so you feel, I'm not in the world anymore if I'm not doing and having as much. So it is interesting, meditation. Meditation, I don't know what you do here if you have taught it. I assume that Peggy might have, because she's a meditative person. I've known her a lot. Anyhow, so at 16, being a questioning child, I was always told, they didn't say TMI then, but they always said, all right, enough questions. I made a little list, I remember this clearly, what the world valued and what Christianity valued, what it was about Jesus Christ, who was probably, throughout history, the most influential person, certainly in the Western world. 2,000 years ago, he was a man who died at 33, and he only had 3 years of ministry. 33 is young. I know, when we were growing up, it was, don't trust anyone over 30, but now we're all living longer, so. He died, he had no money. Money is a big thing now. That you think, oh, I'm famous because I have so much money. If you look at the world. He had no money. He wasn't what we would call sophisticated and worldly. He had never traveled anywhere. And he wasn't desiring of titles or power. I mean, he was so counterculture, as we know. He called himself the Son of Man. He washed his disciples' feet, as we know we will reenact on Maundy Thursday. And what we would say is important people have others wait on them. So all of it is very paradoxical. It's so different than our values. he, when I was at the school teaching, I remember saying that really one of the most distasteful words is exclusive. But we see it everywhere, and that's supposed to make it valuable. But it really means it excludes a lot of people. He did not exclude, Jesus didn't exclude anyone. The lepers, the poor, the rich. He didn't make an exception for anyone. Everybody was included. So his humility was not humiliation. And he taught, and that's one of the things in the Lenten discipline seems to be important. Lent seems to be a time for listening, for silence, for prayer, for giving up our cultural self-image, not treating ourselves as any less than anyone else, but not being focused on ourselves all the time, which is what our culture encourages us to do. Thomas Merton said, the self, the images that keep us from living abundant lives. And a lot of times, it's not so much that we think we're so wonderful, it's that we think we're inadequate, so we don't like ourselves, so we're spending time trying to measure up. And I hear that even with the young, the very young. No matter where we are in life's path, we can be surprised by joy. We can be surprised to be surprised by joy. I'm looking forward to spending these weeks with you until the end of April, and I hope we can ponder together, and I'd love questions or anything. And in fact, I'm going to ask probably Denise, Denise to put, or Bridget, to put my email in, because I live an hour away in Princeton, and put it in your bulletin, or put it somewhere. And anybody who has a question, a thought, anything, while I'm here, I'd love that. That would mean a lot to me. If you could ask, or disagree with me, or say anything, and I don't mind. There's no TMI. So we'll ponder together, I hope, the paradoxical nature and the countercultural nature of following Jesus the Christ in 2012. The joy of it, the gift of the journey. If we don't feel that it's a joy, if we don't feel it's a gift, we're missing something that we deserve to feel. And I'm going to say that, read the Thomas Merton quote again. If you do not know the difference between joy and happiness, you have not understood the Christian journey. Happiness is based on outside circumstances, but joy is able to be present in the midst of suffering and sadness. Thanks be to God. Amen.